Hi, I'm Noah Clark from Station22.com, and today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the new BlackMagic URSA camera. This review is directly targeted towards two specific groups of users: people who are coming from a DSLR workflow and are considering a potential upgrade to the URSA camera, and people who already own and work with more expensive cameras, such as Red or Alexa, and are curious to see how this camera will stack up. Why are we doing this review? Well, at Station 22 we shoot our higher budget commercials on the Red Epic and our lower budget commercials on the Canon C300. Now both cameras have great merit and picture quality, but they also have workflow challenges and limitations that we're all aware of. We were curious to see how our newest acquisition, the URSA camera, would fit into our lineup and when we would choose to use it over our other cameras. We were lucky enough to receive one of the first 12 cameras to be delivered in the United States, and we thought it might be nice to do a quick review of the camera's features and functionalities, including pros and cons, so that when you receive your camera, you're better informed on how to use it and know what to expect. Also, to those who are now just starting to receive their cameras, there are a lot of small things that are not immediately apparent and can be very frustrating about using this camera, and at this time there is still little to no documentation online on how to get around and just use it. So let's jump in and take a look at this strange and wonderful new offering from BlackMagic, the URSA camera. So when you take URSA out of the box, you're going to notice its weight right away. Now, it's one thing to read that this camera weighs 16.32 pounds, but it's an entirely different thing to actually pick it up. By the time we added glass, a matte box, and a battery to our URSA, she weighed over 20 pounds. This means that if you don't have a heavy-duty tripod, or if you frequently shoot handheld, URSA may not be the camera for you. The next thing you'll notice about URSA is its massive 10-inch fold-out display. This is a big plus in the field, and it really sets URSA apart from other cameras available today. We found that this large display made pulling focus and framing a breeze. And although it's glossy, we didn't have too much trouble in bright sun. On the side of the 10-inch monitor, you'll find the record start-stop button, playback controls, zoom button for punching in to check focus, display button, which turns on and off the guides and camera information on the monitor, and the program button, which lets you monitor an incoming source from the SDI in port, such as another camera. Now, if the huge monitor isn't enough for you, don't worry. There's two more. The other smaller monitors mainly serve to access the camera's menu functions, but they are able to display what you're shooting as well. Moving along the body, we have the C-Fast card slots, Iris for scene averaging SLR-type lenses, Focus for autofocusing SLR-type lenses, Peaking for focus assist monitoring, Display, which lets you toggle back and forth between the camera's info and the secondary monitoring display, Menu, where you adjust all of the camera settings, Slate for inputting scene info, and the power button. On the flip side of this camera, you'll find a set of redundant buttons. This is actually super helpful, as your first AC can be changing camera settings, leaving you free to continue working on the other side of the camera. Right underneath that is a headphone jack with a proper 1/4-inch input. Huge audio level meters allowing you to finally get a decent idea of your audio recording level, a set of XLR inputs, and up on the screen a scrolling audio waveform display for visual confirmation. No more futzing around with Zoom recorders or delicate 1/8-inch cable adapters, no more guessing at the input level, and no more syncing your audio in post. Sorry for the moment of cheese, but from my years of DSLR shooting, I cannot tell you how much I missed these features. Right above the XLR inputs, you'll find a 12-volt out for powering accessories, and one of the SDI outs for external monitoring. This is one of 2 SDI outs on the camera, the other being located on the back. Now, it was really hard to get an answer from BlackMagic on this, but apparently these are both 10-bit 422 outputs, or at least that's what we've been told. Next, you'll find an SDI in, which feeds the camera an external source, reference in, timecode in, and timecode out. Okay, am I missing something? Probably. Let's move on. So on to URSA's menu. URSA's menu is divided into 4 sections: camera, audio, recording, and display. Those of you coming from, let's say, a red camera menu will feel right at home with the simplicity of URSA's simple menu structure. While those who are more used to, let's say, a Sony structured menu like the F55 will wonder where they're hiding the secret menus. There are in fact no secret menus. At least I haven't found them. This camera's WYSIWYG style menu makes operation on set speedy and efficient, but that's not to say that it's not lacking a few options it really should have, but more on that in a moment. So let's start with the top of the sidechain, the camera menu. The first item in the list, Camera ID, is used to differentiate your camera from other cameras you might be using on set. However, there is a much more useful function I've found for this that we will be discussing in the next section, Tips and Tricks. Next is where you set the date and time, followed by the ISO. Currently, the ISO only comes in 3 flavors, 200, 400, and 800. We were informed by BlackMagic that the URSA camera's native sensor ISO is 400. If you push it to 800, you'll probably experience some unwanted noise, and, spoiler alert, it's not the prettiest kind of noise I've seen. Next down the list is white balance. Now, people coming from other camera platforms will immediately notice that the white balance doesn't move in even increments of 100. This, in our experience, isn't a huge deal, but we've all been in those situations where there's tungsten lighting inside but strong daylight pouring through the windows, giving you that WTF white balance that's somewhere between here and a stiff drink. In those situations, having more options can really help you dial it in. Finally, on the camera menu is shutter angle. Now, they've given you plenty of options to choose from here. However, there is no option to display shutter speed, only shutter angle. If you're used to working with DSLRs and setting shutter speeds, then you'll need to adjust your math accordingly. Next, we move down to the audio menu. First, we have a microphone input, which is not, by the way, how you control the input level of an external microphone. The URSA comes equipped with an internal mic located on the bottom front of the camera, which you enable with the next menu item down the list, Audio Input Source. URSA gives you 3 options of input source: internal mic, external mic, and line. The internal mic, which you control with the aforementioned top slider, is not really ready for prime time when it comes to audio quality. How bad is it? Well, this is the sound of me being recorded by URSA's internal microphone. As you can hear, it's pretty tinny, and I wouldn't rely on it for anything too crucial. That being said, if you have an audio guy on set recording audio to an external recorder, the internal mic would be good enough for a scratch track, so you could sync later in post. Okay, enough of that, switching back to XLRs. Sounds better, doesn't it? Next, you'll see Channel 1 input and Channel 2 input, which give you independent level controls of the audio being fed into the XLRs. If you had a boom op feeding you on Channel 1 and a lav mic feeding Channel 2, this is how you would set the independent levels. Smack dab in the middle of the two, you have the option to feed Channel 2 with whatever source is coming from Channel 1. You will then notice that your sliders are linked. Final item on the audio menu is speaker volume. You will notice this little cutout right here, which is URSA's speaker. It's mainly used for checking that your clip does in fact contain audio during playback. How good is it? Well, if you're on set and everybody is completely quiet and you have fresh batteries in your hearing aid, then you will be able to hear it. But if you're in any normal or noisy environment, you're much better served by bringing a nice pair of headphones. Okay, moving on to the recording menu. We only have 4 items, the first of which is recording format. You currently have 9 options on how you can record your clips. 4 in 1080, 4 in 4K, which is not actually 4K proper, but Ultra HD, 3840 by 2160. And finally, 4K RAW, which records at 4000 by 2160. You will see that all of the options record directly in the ProRes format with the exception of 4K RAW, which currently shoots Cinema DNG files. That allows for the greatest flexibility in post, as you'll see later in this review, but comes with a hefty toll of large file sizes and extra workflow. Next is dynamic range, where you can choose to shoot in video mode or film mode. BlackMagic Film Mode is more akin to shooting in log and gives you a very flat picture which is meant to be graded. On down the line, we have frame rate, which gives you a bevy of options in 1080 or Ultra HD, up to 60p actually, and produces very nice slow motion images. It's worth noting, however, that shooting in RAW mode is capped at 30 frames per second. So if you want the power of RAW at higher frame rates, you're currently out of luck. And finally on the list, we have time-lapse mode. Again, no shortage of options here. In fact, I think BlackMagic did a good job of inserting plenty of options for a variety of time-lapse choices. Now, we didn't test this feature heavily, but what we did shoot provided good results and it was very easy to work with. Our final category is the display menu, and we'll start here with dynamic range. Now, if you remember, there was a dynamic range option on the recording menu as well. The difference being is the recording menu dynamic range controls is actually what's being printed to your clip, while the display menu dynamic range solely controls the look of the monitor. This is helpful when you're shooting in film mode but want to monitor with the approximation of the final picture. It's worth noting, however, that this only affects URSA's big sexy iPad of a monitor screen as well as the two side displays. It does not currently output the LUT over the SDI cable for external monitoring. This would be a huge advantage and is high on my wish list, as it would prevent clients from seeing a dull log-type image over at Video Village. Tips and tricks. File naming. Earlier, I mentioned we found a better use of the Camera ID function. When you mount the CFast cards on your computer after shooting, you'll note that URSA's naming structure is that of Camera ID, date, time, and then clip number. So essentially, your ProRes QuickTimes will all start with the name set by the Camera ID. If you're not using multiple cameras on set, you may find that it is more useful to use the Camera ID function to name your scene. That way, when the clips come in, they are easily identifiable and should make organizing a breeze. Accessories you'll need. Here's a quick list of things you'll need to get your URSA up and running. Keep in mind that although URSA is an affordable 4K camera body, you'll still need some accessories to get it running, and they can be pricey. CFast 2.0 cards. Currently, a SanDisk 120GB CFast 2.0 card costs around $1,200 and only buys you about 6 minutes of recording time in RAW mode, about 18 minutes in Ultra HD, and just over an hour in 1080 ProRes HQ. Now, in the next section of our review, Money-Saving Hacks, I'll show you a nice workaround we found to save a chunk of change until CFast cards drop in price. Also, you're going to need a CFast 2.0 card reader. Even though CFast cards look identical to CF cards, your current CF card reader won't read your CFast cards, and no, your new CFast reader won't read your CF cards. Confusing? Yes. Also, you're going to need a battery plate to power URSA externally. We opted for the V-mount IDX plate designed for URSA, which currently retails for around $180. You can also opt for an Anton Bauer battery plate. In our testing, we got almost 3 hours of camera life powering URSA with our current V-mount 190 watt-hour batteries. Your mileage may vary. But if you're coming from a DSLR workflow and don't have V-mount or Anton Bauer batteries, this will add up. Next, and I can't stress this enough, you're going to need a heavy-duty tripod. If your current tripod isn't rated for at least 20 pounds, then you can tack on the cost of a new head and sticks. Most quality tripods that sit in this class are priced at about $5,000 and up. We're fond of the O'Connor 1030D solution, but we had a Manfrotto 510 sitting around that seemed to handle URSA just fine. Useful money-saving hacks. CFast cards. Remember that money-saving tip I promised you regarding CFast cards? Well, here it is. This is a CFast 2.0 card. As I mentioned previously, the recommended SanDisk 120GB card currently costs around $1,200. This is a CFast 1.0 card from Atomos. This 128GB card currently retails for around $239. Now, in our testing, the CFast 1.0 card from Atomos had no trouble recording 1080 ProRes HQ files. When we moved up to Ultra HD and RAW recording, however, We were only able to record for a few minutes before URSA warned us with a flashing red triangle light. I don't know what it means, but it looked bad. So, if you're interested in working with URSA, but are not quite ready to move to a 4K workflow just yet, the Atomos 1.0 cards may be a useful stopgap until the prices of CFast 2.0 cards drop, which probably by the time you're watching this review will have already happened. Custom case. One of the benefits of a hard case with custom cut foam is that you know that your new investment is protected. However, if you've ever priced out custom foam cut cases, you'll know that they're not cheap. So here's a useful hack. URSA currently ships in a heavy-duty, custom-cut rubber foam block. I've actually never really seen anything like it. It's dense, sturdy, and fits URSA's body perfectly snug. We took this rubber foam block oddity into the camera shop and found that a Pelican 1624 case, which is the code name for a Pelican 1620 case that has padded dividers, fit the custom padded rubber block like it was meant for it. It even has room on the side to add your extra stuff. Okay, so now on to some real-world tests. First, let me start off by saying that when searching for reviews on new cameras I'm interested in purchasing, I'm often put off by reviews that solely focus on shooting dynamic range charts or color charts or resolution charts because it doesn't give me any indication of how the camera truly looks. If you're curious about purchasing this camera, you'll probably want to see its performance as it pertains to situations you might actually be shooting. We'll try to cover a range of subjects, and hopefully you'll find this section answers your specific questions in a visually helpful way. Let's take a look. So, my friend JP rolled his eyes and told me that whenever somebody gets a new 4K camera, they inevitably film a close-up of a flower. Not to break tradition, let's begin our look at URSA's footage with this close-up of a flower. Now, this being officially the first shot I took when I brought URSA home and took her out of the box, I was immediately impressed. The color reproduction of this sensor is really, really nice, and moreover, it doesn't look like video. As much as I love my C300, I still struggle to capture truly cinematic-looking images that don't have that video feel. On the other hand, shooting with our Epic, we get beautiful images, but then have to deal with the drudgery of the post workflow. URSA promised cinematic images that were immediately encoded in the ProRes format. Now that's not to say URSA's RAW features aren't mind-blowing, because they truly are. But these first couple of tests, I focused solely on shooting in URSA's 3840 by 2160 ProRes HQ format. Now what you probably can't see if you're watching this on the web is the incredible detail captured by URSA. So let me help out by enlarging this image. Right away, you'll notice the pollen scattered around the flower's petal, and all of these spindly bits that aren't apparent until you zoom in. Also, take note of how well the image holds up when magnified like this. You could easily reframe your shot without penalty of noticeable resolution loss. This is the power of shooting in 4K, and URSA is doing a fantastic job of it. Here's another great example. This is a very fine spiderweb I found outside my door. I tossed a few blades of grass in there for perspective to give you an idea of just how fine the strands were. When we magnify the image, we see that even the thinnest strands hold up without signs of rasterization. Continuing the Wild Kingdom tour of my backyard, here's a little hairy, creepy, disgusting, jumping spider I found crawling on an overturned folding chair. Not so sure I want to magnify this little guy, but sure enough, when we do... Okay, so the camera's not that good. But when we do enlarge, look at how well the image holds up. We can now see he's got a creepy little face, and shooting in 4K means that I now have the ability to pan about the image as he crawls off to be with his creepy little family. Really, when you're using this camera, you'll feel like you have the ability to pull a clean frame as you would from a still camera. In this example, even when I magnify by 500%, the color and detail left in the image just look awesome. So, the last few examples were that of 4K ProRes. Now let's move on to the power of shooting Ursa in RAW mode. Here's a quick shot I grabbed of my daughter sitting by the fireplace around dusk. There wasn't a ton of available light, and I was using Canon glass that wasn't incredibly fast, maybe a 4 something. First thing to notice here is how there's little to no detail in the wicker patio furniture. Also, the lava rocks are just black shapes that retain very little detail as well. Now, let's look at the same shot using the RAW recovery features. Immediately, of course, you'll notice it's brighter, but take a look at the wicker and you'll see there was actually a lot more information left in the brown area that wasn't present in the previous shot. The same goes for the lava rocks. The detail just comes alive. This, of course, was only possible by recovering information that was kept in the camera's raw data. Here's another example. We drove up to the Overlook in Culver City to get a shot of our lovely assistant Kate standing by the bench with downtown Culver in the background. Now, Kate was standing in the shade, so we exposed for her face and body, which left the background completely hot and overexposed. Those of you coming from a DSLR workflow will know this problem well, and really, there's not much that can be done once it's shot this way. Shooting with RAW, however, is a completely different situation. And with some simple RAW adjustments, voila, the background comes fully back into the realm of a usable shot. Let's take a look at the side-by-side so you can really appreciate how much information has been recovered in the city's overexposed vista. Here is basically the same shot, but we let Kate sit down. Again, you'll notice the amazing recovery possible with RAW. What's really great about it is that we're not simply making an adjustment that affects the picture as a whole, like you would normally do by globally color correcting a non-RAW image. Instead, we're targeting specific portions of the picture, like exposure, highlights, shadow detail, and contrast from the Cinema DNG file, which allows for a much nicer overall correction. Now that we've seen what Ursa is capable of, I wanted to see a side-by-side comparison of Ursa's RAW abilities next to the Red Epic. So we called in our buddy Mick Pacifici over at Evergreen Studios to help us build a rig that would house the Ursa and Red side by side for a direct comparison. Evergreen Studios is well known for their 3D production, and without them I really couldn't have done this, so a big thank you to Evergreen for all their help. They were able to rig it up so the Ursa and Red sensor plane were perfectly aligned, and we begun our tests. First, we started out by overexposing our image and opening up to somewhere between 2.8 and 4. As you can see on the left, Ursa's image is completely blown out, while the Red is pretty hot but doing a better job of keeping the highlights in check. After RAW recovery, however, we found that Ursa did much more heavy lifting when it came to bringing back information. The trees and grass that were previously gone came right back. The skin tone is definitely nicer on the Ursa, and the hair and dress color are more accurate. There's also more detail in the hair. I should note, by the way, that we were using the exact same Zeiss 50mm Super Speed on both cameras, so we could do an apples-to-apples comparison. The next test, we closed down a bit to somewhere between 4.5 and 6. Again, Ursa is a bit toasty and the Red is pretty flat. After RAW recovery, we noticed that Ursa once again brought back more of the background. And again, I prefer the skin tone, dress, and hair detail. Moving on, and closing down the iris further to somewhere between 5, 6, and 8, the Ursa exposure seems much better than previous takes, but the face is starting to look a bit in shadow. Now, of course, we weren't using any lighting or fill because we wanted to see just what the camera's RAW could bring back. Not surprisingly, both cameras did a very nice job of recovering information, and I think this is Red's best take so far, as the skin tones look smoother and more natural than they did in the other takes. But once again, I gotta say, I kinda prefer the look of Ursa overall. At this point though, I think it's more of a preference thing. Okay, last comparison. This time, we just exposed for the background, which left the face and hair very shadowy. Now, take note of how underexposed the hair and dress are, which will be of considerable importance in just a second. After recovery, Ursa reveals one of her biggest flaws: fixed pattern noise. Now, this was a huge problem for the BlackMagic production camera, and since this is the same sensor, it stands to reason that this is the same problem. In general, we found that we had a much easier time overexposing URSA's sensor in RAW mode and bringing back information than we did when we underexposed the sensor and tried to recover the information. URSA's fixed pattern noise is a real problem. I mean, it's ugly, awful, and pretty much unusable. When the original Red came out, it suffered from this problem as well. But take a look at the current Red Epic on the right. It's smooth and clean and did a fantastic job of recovering the underexposed image. This is one of those things that reminds you that you're working on a $6,000 camera. Green screen. So, a big part of Station 22's business is shooting green screen. We have a green cyc in our facility and we're constantly getting last-minute calls to shoot something or other. When we bought the C300, we thought it would make a great camera choice for green screen based on its size and workflow. But, as it turns out, it's just terrible with green screen, and we never choose it. URSA, however, with its 10-bit 422 ProRes recording, seemed like a good fit for this type of work. Well, wow. Wow, 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 is all I have to say about URSA and green screen. It keys better than almost any other camera I've tried, and for this price point, it made our purchase of URSA immediately worth it. Now, for these tests, I tried shooting in HD, Ultra HD, and RAW, and I found that we much preferred the HD and Ultra HD workflow, as they yielded fast and stunning results. Even the finest of hairs were retained. Slow motion. No time for extensive testing here, unfortunately, but I will say that if you've been missing proper slow motion with your current camera, you'll be happy with the results that URSA gives you. You can, in fact, shoot up to 60p in Ultra HD. Shooting in RAW mode, however, limits your frame rate to 30. Here's my daughter running around outside with our assistant Kate, shot at 60 frames a second. When we slow it down, the results are clean and very nice. Steadicam. Since Steadicam is such an important part of commercial production, we thought we'd rig URSA up and see how easy it was to yield this beast of a camera. Now, I'm no Steadicam op, but my friend Orlando is. He accompanied us on our day of testing and generally only had positive things to say.
It's a pretty good size for Steadicam. It's got the same bottom configuration as an Alexa, so you can use your existing Alexa and a vibration plate, which you can see right here. It's powered by a 12-volt 4-pin XLR, which is pretty standard to power off my sled. It's a pretty nice build.
For the most part, we shot in either RAW or Ultra HD in film mode. I can now feel comfortable saying that URSA is a nice addition to a Steadicam rig and yields great results. Low light. So we knew that URSA wasn't a low light powerhouse going into this candlelit test, but we thought we'd do a quick URSA versus C300 side by side just to make sure. The C300 is the low light king, of course, and had no trouble with this shot. Whereas URSA struggled even when we opened up to T15 at 800 ISO. This test, although predictable, still shows that low light is not one of URSA's best tricks. Black hole sun. URSA is the first BlackMagic camera I have owned, and I've heard tall tale of what happens to this sensor when you shoot into the sun. This was a problem on the original Red as well, but with sensor upgrades the problem was solved. Well folks, I'm sorry to say, the black hole sun problem is not that magical stuff of legend, but very real. Now, if this were a locked-off shot of the sun, it would be easy to fix in post. But being that we're shooting through leaves and trees, we're just stuck with what we've shot. Now, this is a real problem and really needs to be addressed by BlackMagic. Global shutter. Not sure this even warrants a section, but yep, global shutter, check. No more jello. Moire. Those of you who shoot lots of corporate interviews on DSLR cameras will be all too familiar with the problems of Moire when your interview shows up wearing a suit or tie that has a tight pattern in it. Shooting with our C300 completely eliminated this problem, thank God. But we were curious to see how URSA would do. Our assistant Kate gladly donned this striped prison number, accompanied by a res chart we had sitting around, and here's what we got. Now, to be fair, this shirt is pretty susceptible to the phenomenon of moire pattern, and the res chart with its ultra-fine lines, even more so of course. It was kind of tough to tell if URSA was doing a good job at suppressing the moire, so we set up and shot the same thing with our 5D for comparison. As you can see, the 5D shot looks like I took the red pill and live in the Matrix, whereas URSA's footage, although not perfect, is doing a much better job at suppressing the moire. At a recent award show, I brought URSA along to shoot backstage interviews. As you can see, the picture looks great and it doesn't suffer from moire. If I had to give URSA's moire suppression a rating, I'd say it's a strong 7 out of 10, whereas the Canon C300 I'd give a 9 and the 5D a limping 4. So, would I recommend the new URSA camera? Well, that totally depends on what type of shooter you are. If you're someone who likes to be part of new technology as it happens, and are looking for an affordable way to get into a full-size production camera, the URSA camera is an exciting peek into the lower-priced, higher-performance cameras of our industry's very near future. If you own fast glass and a heavy-duty tripod, you will marvel at the beautiful images produced by the URSA camera. But keep in mind, you need good lighting and a large hard drives for this beast of a camera to truly shine. On the other hand, if you're somebody that regularly works solo, needs to work handheld, or most importantly, shoots in low light conditions, then you will want to more carefully ponder your decision to buy this camera. Now, I've been in touch with BlackMagic's PR team prior and during this review process to discuss some of the issues and general camera quirks related to URSA. So far, they seem to be responsive and truly interested in this camera's future. Of course, being a responsible reviewer, I have set up a website to have your specific questions answered, and for updates to this camera as they happen. Simply go to UrsaCam.com to ask questions and join the discussion. Again, thanks for watching Station 22's review of BlackMagic's URSA camera. I'd like to give a big thank you to Mick Pacifici, JP Perry, Orlando Duguay, and all the folks at Evergreen Studios for their participation in helping test this URSA camera. If you'd like more information on Station 22 and the type of work we do, please visit station22.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.